Okay, we are recording, which is great. And now we'll start to let our attendees in.
Oh boy.
3, 2, and 1. Welcome, everyone. We're just letting everybody kind of sign in and sign on, and we'll get started. Thanks for being here. Give it about another minute to let folks get that last cup of coffee and settle in for our fantastic speaker today. See, I got my water.
I have a jug of coffee. It's Saturday, so it's 32 ounces today.
That's right, it's important. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to our invasive species virtual walk. It's a webinar being presented by the Mountaintop Arboretum. We're so glad you've joined us today for this presentation by our own staff horticulturist, Ryan Moore. Before I introduce Ryan, just a few quick administrative items. There is a Q&A box. On my screen, it pops up on the bottom. When I move my cursor around, it may be at the top of your screen. That's a way for you to feel free to be typing in questions as they come to you throughout the presentation, and Ryan will answer those at the end. We're going to see if we can make today's program about an hour long, give or take a few minutes. If you enjoyed today, we hope you'll sign up for more programs. We're doing a lot more. Please go onto our website at www.mtarboretum.org, or you can follow us on Facebook. And now about our speaker. My colleague, I'm so happy that I get to work with this person. He's so knowledgeable and a nice guy, and he makes good coffee. Ryan Moore joined the Arboretum in 2019, and he's been continuously learning and experimenting in professional horticulture since 2008. His early experience includes Morris County Parks, Frelinghuysen Arboretum, New Jersey Botanical Garden, Mount Cuba Center, and Aquascapes Unlimited. He eventually returned to Morris County Park's Willowwood Arboretum, where he was a foreman. Ryan's diverse skill set includes chicken and pig farming, organic vegetable production, hydroponic growing, commercial nursery production, grounds maintenance, and the ability to work in any style of garden. And so I present to you Ryan Moore. Take it away, Ryan.
Well, hello everybody, and thank you for being here today. I know there's a lot of things that people care about, and invasive species I feel like are underappreciated. So thank you everyone for being here, and let's get started. All right, welcome to the Mountaintop Arboretum Invasive Species Virtual Walk. So let's get started. As soon as I figure out how to use the internet here. Oh, there we go. All right, so before we jump into this, I think we have to know what an invasive plant is. We have to know what a native plant is. And a native plant is a plant that is part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years, hundreds or hundreds of thousands of years really, in a particular region or ecosystem. Now, the word native should always be used with a geographic qualifier, that is native to New England, for example, or native to the Southwest. Only plants found in this country before European settlement are considered native to the United States. Now, this is from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is part of the USDA, so that is the government definition. All right. And now, what is an invasive plant? So an invasive plant is a plant that is both non-native and able to establish on many sites, grow quickly, and spread to the point of disrupting the plant community or ecosystem. So that's how a presidential executive order defined it. It's also a species that is non-native or alien to the ecosystem under consideration, and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So to have an example of that, let's say that mugwort, which is one of the plants we're going to go over, is growing near a disturbed stream. It's growing in a riparian area, and we have a high rainfall event, and the water goes up, and because the mugwort has a shallow root system, it erodes, the soil gets washed downstream, the mugwort gets washed downstream, and we've now got contaminated water. It's got more nutrients in it. It goes into a reservoir of drinking water, and it causes more algae and bacteria in that water. That would be economic harm and harm to human health. Whereas you could have deep-rooted willows and sycamores along that stream bank, which are going to hold that in place and be much better. So that's an example of how an invasive plant is not really what you want in certain areas or any area. And we're going to go over a couple different concepts for dealing with invasive plants. Now, there's more than one way to do many of these things. I'm going to go over a couple things, and I want you to use what works for you, time-wise, skill-wise, and materials-wise. So the first thing is pulling or digging. It's attempting to remove the plant and its roots. There's a great tool for this that I like to have, or that I use, and it's a weed wrench, and I'm going to show you a picture of that in a little bit, but that's really handy for small shrubs or small trees. Second thing is doing cutbacks, which is removing all of the top growth in an attempt to starve the plant. You want to prevent flowering and reseeding. This allows the area to start recovering. This probably won't kill the target plant. Certain plants, it will do it, but it will take years to get there. The downside is cutbacks take a significant amount of time and effort, and you may have to repeat this for a while. And smothering. Now, this is something I've used more with herbaceous plants, but I'm going to go over two methods of this, and I've used both of them. Smothering a plant means depriving the plant of light and hopefully killing it in the long term. The effectiveness of smothering depends on the plant, its life cycle, and how it spreads. Plants that spread via rhizome can be difficult to smother. It could take several years, and many seeds require light to germinate and will be unable to germinate or grow through the barrier. And this will kill non-target plants. So if you've got a purple loosestrife and it's next to something else that you really like, and you're going to try and smother it out, you're going to do some damage. So this is a complete sterilization of an area. So this is one type of a weed wrench. It's the exact same thing. It's basically a lever attached to a fulcrum, and this will work on anything that you can fit those jaws around. What's nice is this is light enough that you can throw it on your shoulder. You can walk out to the woods where you don't have a trail, where you can't get with motorized equipment. And this is great for pulling out things like burning bush or young Ailanthus seedlings and things like that. Really, really handy. So some methods of smothering. I've done both of these. One is you lay cardboard down with no tape and no labels, and it does take a while to remove them, and it is tedious, but do it in winter and have it all ready for yourself in summer. Now, you cover the cardboard with 2 to 3 inches of aged wood chips or mulch. The cardboard can take 1 to 2 years to decompose. It's a pretty effective barrier. I've used it on things like mugwort, and it's working really well. And this is also, you can plant through the cardboard, which is a nice part of it in about a year after it's been there. And the second one is a silage tarp. I've used this in farming, but it's once again very effective for things like if you have a huge drift of mugwort and you just want to smother the area, sterilize it, and start from the beginning. Silage tarp is really nice because it's physically very heavy. It's UV treated, so it's not going to degrade in sunlight, and you know, it's going to got two different colored sides, one white and one black. So I like to leave the black side up to raise the soil temperature and solarize it more, hopefully killing some of the seeds and the plant material that's, well, killing all of the plant material that's in there, but killing some of the seeds. It has to be held down with weights. So on farms, I've used tires and rocks, or you can use sandbags, whatever works. And it works best on herbaceous plants, things like mugwort. And you have to have the area cut back first, and then you can start sterilizing the soil with your tarp. To the next slide. So you can't talk about controlling invasive plants without talking about herbicide. And I'm not saying the Arboretum approves of herbicide or recommends them, but it's a discussion that we have to go over this topic. So systemic herbicide, such as glyphosate, is drawn into the plant and sent to the roots. That's why it's so effective at killing plants. You have to always read the label and follow the directions, and the methods of applying systemic herbicide include spraying, which is fast, easy, effective, and affordable. You've got higher non-target plants being killed that way. You have injection, which I will show you what device that is, and that's used pretty often with Japanese knotweed. You're using more concentrate, but you have less non-target injury than spraying, and it is more effective. Hack and squirt, which is used on woody material such as Ailanthus altissima, which is tree of heaven. You're using a hatchet. You're cutting a pattern around the tree trunk without girdling the tree and applying herbicide to those cut marks. If you girdle the tree, the herbicide is not going to be all that effective. You're just going to kill the top of the tree, and it's just going to come back up somewhere else. Stump painting, so you cut the plant to the ground, and you do this after ideally the summer solstice, or as basically later summer, early fall. Plants go into a different hormonal cycle at that point, and they're sending more nutrients and more material back to the roots to save up for next year. So that is the most effective time to apply any herbicide if you're going to apply it. And as always, read the label and follow directions. And oftentimes herbicide will have directions on how to do stump painting. And then a sponge applicator, which is something that's actually going to hold concentrate, and it's going to apply it via a sponge. It's still effective. You're reducing your drift, you're reducing non-target injury, and it does take longer to apply, but it is effective. All right, so little disclaimer here, glyphosate-based systemic herbicides are toxic to aquatic and amphibious life, and I have seen ponds with all of the tadpoles died, so things to keep in mind. Several non-glyphosate herbicides can be toxic to non-target plants. So you might apply it to a tree, or you might apply it to an invasive vine you don't want, but it's going to get into the soil, or it's going to get out to those plants. And I have seen things like a 60-foot oak tree defoliate in the middle of the season because somebody applied an herbicide that got out, you know, something to be aware of. Glyphosate doesn't do that nearly as much as several other herbicides that I've looked into. And it is a useful tool, but best used with discretion and reason. So the argument I've often heard is if you know where the source is and you know you can eliminate the source, then go ahead and use herbicide. For my own purposes, something I'm doing is I'm taking care of the really big stuff with herbicide, and then I know I'm going to be able to maintain that area and then just hand remove stuff from there on out. So try and use discretion. Here we have an example of hack and squirt. Now, if you were to girdle this, you'd cut all the way around. That's, once again, just going to put out root sprouts. To do hack and squirt, you're going to cut again, you're going to cut again up here, and you're going to form a pattern around this. And that's an herbicide concentrate in there. And you hack and squirt immediately. Over here is a sponge applicator. This holds a small amount of concentrate, and you just rub it on foliage. And this is just one of many herbicide injectors that exist and is useful for Japanese knotweed, because Japanese knotweed has hollow stems. And there is a natural herbicide recipe. I've heard that the person who made this recipe has had it be effective against Japanese knotweed, and I believe he injected it into the stem. So you're using 1 gallon of horticultural vinegar. When you look that up on the internet, you'll see a couple different brands, but this recipe was made to be used with 30% acidity horticultural vinegar. 1 ounce of dish soap. Your dish soap is a surfactant. It makes your natural herbicide stick to your plant, and it helps it get through rainstorms and stuff like that. 1 cup of white salt flour that you can get from a restaurant supply store, and 8 ounces of citrus oil. Now, there already is organic herbicides that you can buy that are based on citrus oil. So if you don't want to make this up, you can go find something pre-made and you can use that. Organic herbicides typically kill the top growth of a plant. They're not systemic. They're not going to be drawn in. Horticultural vinegar is extremely acidic, and it can basically result in a chemical burn if you spill it or you mishandle it. So something to be very wary of. Wear long chemical gloves, wear a respirator if you have one, and always mix it outside. Wear chemical boots or a Tyvek suit or long sleeves and long pants. It's not, that stuff's not a joke. You can get hurt. And we're going to go into our first plant. So thank you everybody for bearing with me through the boring stuff. And I'm not going to make you read the text on this. I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to look at pictures. All right, so here is our first plant. All right, Artemesia vulgaris, or mugwort. Now, it can be about 2 to 6 feet tall. This is a big mature colony, gets about 6 feet tall every year. It grows on forest edges. It takes full sun to part shade, grows on roadsides and disturbed areas. So you'll see it, I frequently see it along stream sides, really. And now let's go and look at an ID picture here. So mugwort has a pubescent fuzzy stem. It has a sage-like odor. Very, very helpful to know that. If you have any questions, your nose is a really good ID. I'm really good at IDing plants. And the leaves are heavily dissected here. And they're alternate. So when you have a leaf come out and you go up the stem a little bit and you have another leaf come out, that's alternate. If you have 2 leaves coming out at the same point, that's opposite. So it's alternate, it's got a fuzzy stem, and it's got a sagey smell. And the underside of the leaf is silver. Now here's the rhizome. I wanted to show how it would spread. We've got various roots coming out and more top growth, and it can be pretty aggressive. The nice part is it has a shallow root system. So these are things that look like it but aren't it. Ambrosia artemisifolia is ragweed. This is what causes those hay fever allergies. So if you see this one, you still might not want it. And over here, this is still not native, but it's not nearly as aggressive, is Tansidum vulgare, or tansy, which has a completely different smell to it, and that's a nice way to ID it. In fact, tansy smells very good. How to control mugwort. So small plants can just be pulled up or dug, and it will take several attempts to get all of it, but luckily it's not very deeply rooted. It can be smothered, although I would imagine it's going to take a year to a year and a half to have the plant die underneath your smothering material. And it is easily controlled through a systemic herbicide. My personal experience with this is doing 2 cutbacks during the season and then doing an herbicide spray towards the end of summer, and you can have a really effective kill. Fallopia japonica, or Japanese knotweed, which is actually named one of the 100 most invasive plants in the world. So let's go to the picture. This is actually a culvert from a creek to help with flooding. So Japanese knotweed has alternate leaves, has branching, a slightly zigzag stem. The leaves are thick and they feel a little bit coarse and leathery. The stems are hollow and they're speckled with purple. You will often find this in riparian areas. It likes wet soil. It grows in wetlands and it'll grow in disturbed areas, just like nearly all of our invasive plants thrive in disturbed areas. So here's another example of how it is alternate. And you can see the slight zigzag to the stem here. I got this one just because I was super amused about the Japanese knotweed being strangled by the bindweed, which is also invasive. And you can really see that zigzag stem here. And here's that hollow stem. So if anybody's going to do the herbicide injection, you don't want to go all the way through the stem, you want to go into the stem and inject into the stem. And here's how it spreads. Now I was only able to get a small root out, but you can see a stem from last year and a stem from last year, and 2 on this growing this year. And this will form dense, thick colonies. And there's not a whole lot of things that look like Japanese knotweed. It's anything in the buckwheat family, when they're very small seedlings, will look like it, but you'll learn the difference soon enough, and Japanese knotweed tends to be purple when it germinates. So that's a really good way to ID it. All right. So removal. Small knotweed can be dug, and I have done this and it has worked. You know, a couple years later, I came back and looked and it wasn't there. So doing good. So small knotweed can be dug. Large stands of knotweed can be repeatedly cut. You allow them to re-sprout and you can treat them with herbicide. I did this last year, 2 cuts and a spray with, I believe it was an 18% concentration, which is far beyond what is labeled for any herbicide. But I've heard people, like just conservation organizations, spraying up to 40%. So yeah, I cut that in less than half and it was still 90% effective. People can get carried away. I've also heard of people using 20% and having it be effective. I'm going to try 15% this year and see what happens. And this is not an arboretum property. Knotweed, as many things in the buckwheat family are, they're resistant to glyphosate. So they can require repeated sprays at those frightening concentrations. It may be possible to smother knotweed, but I haven't heard of anybody trying it. And I did mention the stem injection. And yes, the plant can spread 6 to 8 feet a year. So it's not going to just get 6 to 8 feet wider like the whole clump. It'll send out a runner 6 to 8 feet. It'll send out several of them and continue to colonize. So if you do want to smother it, you're going to have to really go beyond the boundaries of the plant. All right, so Lonicera ex bella, or Bell's honeysuckle. Let's go to a picture here. This is a large colony of it. The Lonicera ex bella is a hybrid between two other invasive Asian honeysuckles, Lonicera moroi and Lonicera tartarica. It can get 20 feet tall. If it's growing in young trees, it'll start to climb up them a little bit. Not a vine, but it'll use them as effectively like a trellising. The leaves and branching are opposite, and the leaves are slightly pubescent, and it's flowering now in June. It grows in open meadows, woodland edges, and open woodlands. It can be found in wet to average moisture areas. Here it is in flower. We're going to look at a deer villa flower, which is one of its lookalikes. So just remember those thin strappy petals, they're longer. This one's a white flowered. And this is showing its opposite branching here and its opposite leaves. And I think, here it is layering in. Here we have a main plant. One of the branches went to the ground, put up more branches, and then formed an entirely new large mature shrub. And the bark on the Loniceras is pretty distinctive. So even in winter, you can ID it. So if you wanted to go remove it in winter, which I enjoy doing, you know, as long as there's not snow, it's pretty easy to ID. And our lookalike. This is Deer Villa Lonicera, which is our native bush honeysuckle. The flowers are in groups of 3 to 7, then they turn red with age. The invasive honeysuckles all have white to yellow flowers. It's going to be a pale yellow, with the exception of Tartarian honeysuckle, and that can have white to pink flowers. And that's our Deer Villa Lonicera flowers, our native bush honeysuckle. Vastly different, much smaller. In fact, they're hardly noteworthy, except, you know, when you take a really close-up picture, they look kind of neat. Control. Young honeysuckles can be pulled. They can be weed wrenched, or you can use motorized equipment. Whenever I say motorized equipment, that's if somebody has like a small backhoe available, but it comes with the disclaimer that anytime you disturb the soil, you're going to get more seeds that are going to germinate, and they're not all going to be good. So the least invasive methods that you can use are going to be better. Probably the best way to control Lonicera is doing repeat, like cut back and a stump painting. And you can cut it back, it will resprout. If you don't want to do stump painting, you just want to use a sprayer, and you can do that. So Celastrus orbiculatis, or bittersweet. Let's go to a picture here. This is a young bittersweet. It has a simple ovate leaf. The leaves alternately climb the stem. The vine has, so the mature vine, when you're seeing it go up a tree, it has no tendrils, it doesn't have hairs clinging to it. So Virginia creeper has these tendrils with a little like calcium mixture, that's how it grips. Poison ivy has those hairy stems. Grapevine has that exfoliating, peeling bark a little bit. This doesn't do any of that. This wraps around and climbs its way up. The roots on this are orange, so when you find a seedling, you can pull it, you look, you know what it is. The flowers and the fruits are going to be in the axils of the leaves right here. You're going to have 2 to 3 flowers per fruit cluster, and the leaf here is a simple toothed ovate leaf. It grows in forest edges, roadsides, and disturbed areas. It takes average soil. It's tolerant of full shade to full sun. It's a little weaker in full shade. It definitely wants some sunlight. This will grow along the ground, almost like a ground cover, looking for another tree to climb. So it will spread that way, effectively layering itself in. And the birds really do like the seed, so they definitely eat it and they help it get around. And there's the close-up of the leaf. And here's the orange roots. And this is our native bittersweet, Celastrus scandens. So the flowers here are on the terminal, or the end of the vine here, and they're in this much larger cluster, 6 or more flowers per cluster. That's really the easiest way to ID them. I think the leaf is definitely more pointed, but that flower cluster is pretty distinctive. And control. Young Celastrus, they are easily pulled. Even older vines, you can do some damage to them. They're usually not so rooted so deeply and difficultly that you can't get them out. And they can be cut and treated with an herbicide. And treating them with an herbicide may cause damage to nearby trees. That's the time I saw a 60-foot oak defoliate, was somebody cut a vine next to it and treated it. So, Eunonymous alatus, or burning bush. Let's take a look. This is a colony of burning bush. It gets seeds. The birds do like the seeds, but typically the way this spreads is by layering in, just like that picture we saw with the Lonicera. Let's look at a close-up here. It has opposite leaves. It's really easy to look at that. Has a slightly toothed margin here. And let's look at the stem. This is why it's called winged Eunonymous. These wings on this stem, easiest ID feature. This is commonly still planted and sold for ornamental horticulture because of its fall color. There is so many native plants you could plant for fall color. Why would you plant something that's going to colonize your woods and just ruin everything? It makes me so sad. I mean, I planted blueberries in my front yard because their fall color is fantastic. So, you know, just try anything but this. This plant will grow on forest edge, but it will take deep shade, and it will colonize in the deep shade of the woods, which not very many plants do that. Let's take a look at our native, this is our look-alike. Eunonymous americanus can be distinguished by the combination of its 4-angled wingless stem. So it has wingless green stems. Now you won't find this very often, but you can get this as an ornamental. Its flowers are completely different, and its fruit is completely different. And talking about control, young burning bush can be pulled. They're not so strongly rooted, you know. It takes a really big burning bush to say, I can't pull this. And at that point, cutting it back in herbicide is probably your best option unless you've got access to some equipment. Right, Rose multiflora is an evil plant. Let's look at it here. This is Rose multiflora. This is about 6 feet tall. It's a wall of thorns, and it's very unfriendly. It has these curved, very sharp, like shark tooth looking thorns. It has this pinnately compound leaf here. So Rose multiflora thrives in full sun to full shade. It grows in all types of soil, and it doesn't flower nearly as well in full shade. This plant spreads through seed, but it also layers in, just like our other shrubs. Probably the most helpful ID feature or distinctive is this little bit down here. So this is our pinnately compound leaf, and this is its fringed petiole, right? This petiole, this is one leaf. These are individual leaflets, and this is the fringed petiole at the base of the leaf. And we're going to look at the native one, and it doesn't have these fringes. None of the native roses have these fringes. And these are the flowers. These flowers are born in a cluster. They're smaller, and you've got a lot of flowers per each cluster. So this is one of our native roses. And you'll see here, this petiole doesn't have those hairy fringes sticking out. And the leaflet doesn't even have, or I should say the leaf doesn't have as many little leaflets on it as well. The stem is less thorny, and the thorns are smaller. This is Rosa palustris, and anytime you see something labeled palustris, it means swamp. So you know immediately that plant's going to like wet conditions. The other one that we have that's native is Rosa caroliniana and Rosa virginiana. The flowers are pink. The clusters of flowers, there's only a few flowers, and they're found in the leaf axils and at the end of branches. Rosa multiflora, the flowers are only at the end of the branch. And the flowers here are distinctively pink, and they have much bigger rose hips. You can actually use these rose hips for cooking and jams and such. And you have to mention rose rosette with rose multiflora. This is rose rosette here. So rose rosette is a virus. It's transmitted to roses via a mite, and it affects ornamental roses, it affects native roses, and it affects rose multiflora. And it can kill a rose. It can take a couple of years, but it can kill a rose. And it can stop it from flowering, and you see how it's mutated its growth. So roses can be pulled or dug. You can cut this back 3 times a year for 2 or 3 years, and I've heard it can kill the rose. You can cut back and paint the stump, or you can cut it back, allow it to regrow, and you can try an herbicide on the foliage. I've actually got some organic vinegar at home, not organic vinegar, horticultural vinegar at home, and I'm going to be trying a spray application with that on the roses. I've cut them back, they're looking pretty beat, and see what it does later in the season. But this plant makes me excessively upset because I like ornamental roses. You can't beat a good flowering, fragrant rose. So this is a major problem with the spread of rose rosette. Berberis thunbergii. I only have a picture of one plant because I haven't seen very many of these, but I have seen years ago an entire forest covered in this. Acres and acres of just this. That's a bad sign. When you see acres of one thing, that's bad. So for ID, we've got 2 simple leaves emerging from one spot just above a thorn, which is kind of deceptive because it hides the thorns. The yellow flowers in early spring with a slight lemon fragrance and small red fruits in late summer. And it also has very brightly colored roots. This grows in full sun to full shade in average soil. So this is actually some pretty dry, sandy woods, and it's doing just fine. They grow from seed, and they will layer in and form colonies. There's not a whole lot that looks like this, so I'm not sure what anybody would confuse it with. And luckily, this plant doesn't get very big. It pretty much tops out at about 2 or 3 feet, so you'll be able to just dig these out. You know, a pickaxe or your weed wrench is going to do a lot of damage to these. Alliaria petiolate, garlic mustard, which you can eat. In fact, I've seen people harvest these and like turn them into kale chips. Little olive oil, salt and pepper, bake them in the oven. But anyway, it has this cordate, heart-shaped leaf with this little bit of a serrated edge here. It does have a really distinctive garlic odor. Once again, your nose is a great ID feature, or a great way to ID plants. Nothing else is going to smell like this. Here's a close-up on the leaf. You can see how it's heart-shaped. And here's the plant flowering and going to seed. All right. Now, one thing to note about this plant and pulling it, this is a biennial. This is actually extremely easy to get rid of if you keep pulling it. When it comes up, it's going to come up its first year. Biennial means it comes up its first year, it grows, it flowers its second year, goes to seed, and it dies. So when it comes up, let it come up. You're going to get 30 plants in a small area. The next year, when it starts going to flower, you're going to have 6 plants left. You're not going to have 30 plants going to flower. You're going to have 6 plants going to flower. And it's a heck of a lot easier to pull them then. And this is something you don't need a shovel for. You rapidly, and it does grow in full shade. The downside, when you go to pull this, if it started flowering, those flowers will still probably develop seed if you pull them and throw them on the ground. Even without being in the soil or anything like that, I've seen the flowers start to right themselves and keep growing. So the standard practice is to pull it, put it into a garbage bag, put it somewhere, let it dehydrate and completely die in the sealed bag for about 3 weeks, and then dispose of it with your garbage. Myself, just before it starts flowering, when it's starting to bolt, I pull a lot of this and I tear it up. I hope that's enough, because otherwise if I had to bag it all, I don't know, I'd have to make a special run to the dump. And this could be a lookalike. Our native violet species, the leaf is a little different, still cordate, still, I think this is more heart-shaped. It does not have that garlic odor, and it has a vastly different flower. But if you're looking at just the young growth, these grow in the same environment, and if you're acting quickly, it's definitely something you can mix up. Yeah, and like I said, repeatedly pull. Watch out for the fact that if you leave it, it will produce seed. Let's go to our next one. How am I doing on time here? Okay. So, Lythrum salicaria, purple loosestrife. I don't have a picture of this in flower. I wish I did, but I pulled them all. And it flowers later in summer. It has this lance-shaped leaf. It's sessile, so it's attached directly to the stem. It doesn't have a petiole, and the stem is square. It's a 4-sided stem typically. I've heard it can also be 6-sided, but it's typically 4-sided. This is a perennial, clump-forming herbaceous plant. So it's going to die back to the ground every year and come back. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall on upright stems. It grows in roadsides. It grows in roadside ditches and wetlands. In a wet meadow, this plant will spread prolifically. It'll outcompete just about everything else that's there until you have a stand of purple loosestrife. And that would be great if this was England, but this is not England, and it is not native here. This does reseed prolifically. So here we are. You can see a little bit the squareness of the stem, the opposite leaves, and how they're sessile. The roots also tend to be a little bit purple. And our look-alike, Epilobum ciliatum, right here. The leaf is very, very similar. This has a little bit of a petiole here where the leaf attaches. The stem is rounded. and the seed is scattered by wind, so it's going to get fuzzy when it's done flowering. So control on the Lythrum salicaria. This plant, if you have a lot of it, I understand if you have to spray, but the roots here are not so bad. This can definitely be dug. Small ones can easily be pulled, but this can definitely be dug. If you have hundreds of them, yeah, I understand where you would have to use some herbicide. And actually, our last plant, wow, just made it. I kind of sped through this. Our last plant is Ailanthus altissima, or tree of heaven. Identification. This leaflet is pretty distinctive. So once again, this is a compound leaf. It's known as pinnately compound. These are individual leaflets, and this whole thing is one leaf. First off, it smells like rancid peanut butter. When you crush this, it smells awful. Each leaflet is entire, except for, is entire except for one to several broad teeth at the base of the leaf. So you're gonna have one tooth hiding out in here, and the reason you're gonna have that tooth there is there's a gland on the underside of the leaf. It's a little thickened spot with a gland. And the females of this species produce a large terminal white flower, which will then turn into a cluster of winged chimeras. Those hang on the tree in winter, so you can still ID this tree in winter. It grows in roadsides, disturbed areas, and it tolerates dry sites. In fact, it tolerates awful soil. This tree also spreads through root sprouts and seed. So here it is in flower. And one thing to note here is the stem is smooth. It's not pubescent at all. One of our lookalikes has a pubescent stem, and it has a more jagged leaf. This has a smooth edge on the leaf. And when I say it comes up from root sprouts, I pulled this picture from Wikipedia. I'm so glad they have publicly sourced stuff that's open to everybody. But this tree was cut down, the stump was treated with herbicide, the plant didn't die, and here it is resprouting. Over here, these are sprouts coming off of the root system. I have a lot of this tree on my own property. What I've actually decided to do is cut the tree down, allow the root sprouts to come up, and then I'm going to treat them with herbicide. And in all fairness, I'm going to treat them with herbicide because I'm one person with 17 acres and a lot of invasive plants. But I had an army of helpers. I would be totally open to using other methods, but it's myself and my wife, so we're gonna fight it the hard way. And here are the winged chimeras. Now these hang on the tree in winter, so you can still see them, but it's only on the female plants. And this is what the tree looks like in an ornamental setting when it's taken care of. These trees are short-lived. They die quite easily. They can still get fairly tall. They're brittle. The wood rots very quickly. So if you even wanted to cut it and use it as firewood, the BTUs on it are actually terrible. It's not that useful, and it rots very quick. And our look-alike, we have two. Rhuus typhina, which is staghorn sumac, and Rhuus glabra, which is smooth sumac. So let's look at our sumacs here. You can see this pubescent fuzzy stem. You can see the toothed leaf. Sumacs also have milky sap, while Tree of Heaven does not. And also, once again, Tree of Heaven has that awful smell to it, so your nose is an ID feature. And let me see if I'm missing anything else. Oh yeah, sumacs get clusters of red fruits. They have a big terminal white flower or creamy yellow flower, and they're going to get red fruits, which insects love to hide in and animals love to eat. And here is that pubescent fuzzy stem on the staghorn sumac. So I think we went over the control. And yes, young Ailanthus are brittle and easily snapped. You can just step on it and it'll fall apart. And then I just have some additional resources here. So for Japanese knotweed control, this is a great presentation. This is actually from somebody who presented at a conference, so kudos to them. New York invasive species information. I only went over a little bit of some of the invasive plants here, but there's invasive insects, there's invasive animals, there's invasive aquatic plants. If you want to learn more, this is really interesting. And the Catskill Center. The Catskill Center works with a group known as the Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership. And they're always looking for help with invasive control, citizen science, using resources like IMAP invasives to map the invasive plants in an area and help develop a strategy for dealing with them. So those are, if you want to get involved, if you want to learn more, and if you deal with Japanese knotweed, which I know many people have to deal with, this is some good info, and it's got some recent studies in there. And that is the end of my presentation. And I think I made it just in time.
You did great. Thank you, Ryan. I'd love to encourage everybody to jump in and ask your questions now. This is a great time to open up that Q&A box. So there's a Q&A icon that I believe drops down if you move your cursor. Again, it's at the bottom of my screen, but if you move your cursor to the top of your screen, you should see a Q&A box. And it's great for us if you ask your question. No question too silly. We have an expert, might as well pick his brain. Ryan, if you don't mind reactivating your video, maybe we could see you while you're answering your questions. And then there's a couple there in the question and answer box, so you can jump on in if you want to start on those.
Okay, so first, does the weed wrench work on Lonicera? And it depends on how big the Lonicera are. And if you've got one of those really big ones with 6 stems coming out of one area, you're going to have a hard time dealing with it with a weed wrench. How many times does Japanese knotweed need to be cut down without using herbicide? I've never heard of it working without herbicide. I've heard of it working with organic herbicide, but I've never heard of it being taken care of just by cutting stuff down. And I've got to tell you, I've got a patch of Japanese knotweed that I have cut 3 times this year, and it is still coming up. So it's quite persistent, even though I'm just as persistent. Do I know how long Lonicera retains its alleliopathic properties after it is cut down and chipped? I don't know, but that would be an interesting study, but I don't know. And what should I use to stump paint Bell's honeysuckle? So every herbicide that isn't glyphosate based that I've looked at, and I'm not an herbicide expert, that's not my jam mostly, they can all go into the soil from the root system and they can affect nearby plants. So a glyphosate based herbicide, in my personal experience, is the safest way to deal with painting stumps. And thank you everybody for bearing with me. I had a lot of info there, and I wasn't sure how much time I was going to take, so I kind of sped through it.
It looks like you have one more question too.
From Murmur, yes, the knotweed, you can pour it in at the base. Yes, you can, and it is more targeted, and it does work, and it's actually in that other presentation I've got a link to here, the one from Bugwood. He goes over that method and several others. I think that's a great method. It's just a little bit more time consuming, but it's a great way to do it. So
Right.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you all for attending today. It means the world to us to engage with you and to know that you're still here with us, even virtually. Again, check us out if you'd like at mtarboretum.org or Facebook to know what's coming up next. We're chugging along. We're doing a lot of activities. And of course, if you haven't been up yet, come check out the trails. The building's not open yet, but the trails are open and we'd love to see you. It means the world to us. Okay, give us feedback. You can send feedback to me at allison@mtarboretum.org. I'd love to hear your feedback on your experience of the event. It was recorded. I'm still figuring out how to post the recordings and do a little editing, especially on some of the first couple that we did. But we do hope to have them up and posted for your review. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. Enjoy the weekend and your gardens and the outdoors if you can. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, I'm perfectly happy to answer emails and get back to people.
Yes, and Ryan's at ryan@mtarboretum.org. So thanks a lot, Ryan.
All right, thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.